My name is Myra. I have an older sister, Lizzie, who is 3 years older than me. I also have a mother, a stepfather, and a biological father who lives apart from us. In a normal family, I would be able to explain things this easily, but that's not the case for me. The story of my family is far more complicated and sorrowful. Looking back, the cracks in my family may have started when Lizzie passed the entrance exam for a prestigious private elementary school. I was too young to remember, but I heard later from my father that at the time, my mother was overjoyed. With this, Lizzie's future is guaranteed. Behind those words, there may have already been a sense of favoritism toward my sister. My mother called Lizzie a super child. She started playing the piano at the age of 3, attended French conversation classes at 4, and passed the entrance exam for a competitive private school. My mother proudly showcased Lizzie's talents as if they were her own trophies. On the other hand, I was an ordinary child and a sickly child. I had chronic asthma. My academics were average, my physical activities were limited, and I had no skills that stood out. But I did love drawing. In kindergarten, a picture of my family that I drew was praised by my teacher and displayed in the classroom. However, my mother showed no interest in my drawings. Drawing is fine as long as it's just a hobby. I wonder if my mother ever realized how deeply those words wounded my young heart. I sometimes desperately tried to earn my mother's affection. I wanted to discover a special talent like Lizzie had. But that wish never came true. My mother's attention was always focused solely on Lizzie. The one who saved me from that loneliness was my biological father. On his days off, he always made time for both Lizzie and me. When he learned that I loved drawing, he started spending those days drawing with me. "Myra, your drawings are wonderful." My father always praised my clumsy drawings. One day, he told me that he had displayed one of my drawings on his desk at work. I still vividly remember how happy I felt when I heard that. My father never discriminated between Lizzie and me. When we went to the park, he would push the swing for each of us the same number of times. When buying ice cream, he always made sure to choose ones of equal value for both of us. Those small acts of consideration warmed my heart. "Myra, I want both you and Lizzie to dream big." He would often say that as he patted our heads. Even when he came home tired, he would listen to our stories, laugh with us, and seriously think about our worries. His presence gradually healed the loneliness I felt from my mother's indifference. I still remember my 6th birthday. That day, my mother was away for Lizzie's extracurricular activities. I was home alone in the evening. Being left alone like that was normal, and my mother didn't mind leaving young me at home. Usually I would just draw and wait, but that day was my birthday. I felt lonely, unable to eat cake or celebrate with anyone. But my busy father adjusted his schedule and came home early. He couldn't make a homemade cake, but I still remember the image of him carefully placing candles on the cake he bought from the supermarket. "Myra, just be yourself and find what you love." His words were the complete opposite of my mother's belief that I had to be special. My father taught me the beauty of being ordinary. However, when I was 7 years old, my daily life changed dramatically. The cause was my parents' divorce. I don't have many memories from that time, but the image of my father's back as he left the house and the muffled sound of my mother's sobbing are still engraved in my heart. When my father patted my head for the last time, the warmth of his large hand felt as if it would last forever. But that warmth became a fleeting memory. My father worked as a sales representative at a well-known company, but my mother felt that his salary wasn't enough. Especially after my sister Lizzie started attending a private elementary school, the cost of education and my mother's social expenses put a strain on our family's finances. My mother's social expenses were primarily spent on outings with other mothers from Lizzie's private school, known as Mom Friends. They held weekly lunch gatherings at upscale restaurants, and each time, my mother bought new branded bags and clothes. "This is a necessary expense for social networking," my mother would say. dismissing my father's objections. In reality, my mother was part of a group consisting of mothers from particularly wealthy families among Lizzie's classmates. She insisted that she gained important information there about the best cram schools and beneficial extracurricular activities. But to me, it seemed like her main goal was indulging in luxury, shopping at high-end boutiques, or getting beauty treatments at members-only salons. On my father's payday, arguments over credit card bills became inevitable. "Why do you need an Hermes scarf? You wouldn't understand." I don't want to be seen as the odd one out among the moms at that school. I still remember the stack of receipts my father laid out on the desk one day. A French restaurant in the Upper East Side, a nail salon in Soho, afternoon tea on Fifth Avenue. Sometimes, a single lunch gathering cost more than my father's daily earnings. My mother continued to spend excessively, using the excuse of exchanging information with the other mothers about various extracurricular activities. Piano, ballet, French lessons. She claimed it was all for Lizzie, but I often wondered if it was really to satisfy her own vanity. The kid next door is going to a summer camp overseas. We need to send Lizzie too. My father worked overtime to meet her demands, but his efforts were never enough. My mother's demands kept expanding endlessly. I occasionally peeked at the household ledger on my father's desk. Amidst rows of red numbers, I saw him desperately trying to balance the family budget. The sound of him pressing the calculator late into the night still lingers in my ears. Despite everything, my father worked tirelessly for the family. He started working on weekends, and when he did come home, he was visibly exhausted. Yet he continued to treat Lizzie and me equally with affection. I still remember the warmth when he patted our heads and said, "You're my precious treasures." On his days off, he would take us to the park. We would bring homemade lunches, spread out a picnic sheet, and spend time together as a family. Looking back, that may have been our last truly happy memory. But my mother never understood my father's efforts. "Your income isn't enough to secure Lizzie's future," she would say, and their nightly arguments seemed never-ending. When I woke up at night, I often heard my mother's angry voice echoing through the house. Lizzie would play loud music in her room to drown out the noise. I could only lie in bed, trembling, with my face buried in my pillow. In the end, my father collapsed from overwork, which led to the divorce. However, my mother told a different story to those around us. My husband had an accident at work. My mother lied to the neighbors and school officials, saying that my father had passed away. "Widowhood looks better than divorce," she said, silencing both me and Lizzie. All of my father's photos were put away, and any mention of him was strictly forbidden. To the staff and parents at Lizzie's private school, my mother put on a flawless performance. With the life insurance my husband left behind, I'm doing my best to provide for my children's education. Sometimes she would even shed tears, crafting a story that evoked sympathy from those around her. I suffered because of that lie. I had to deny the existence of my father, who was actually alive and still thinking about us. For a child, that was an unbearable burden. I later learned that my father had been sending child support regularly after the divorce. But at the time, I knew nothing about it. A year after the divorce, my mother met Davis. He was the owner of a real estate company. At that time, my mother was struggling with financial burdens and raising us alone, and Davis seemed to offer her comfort. "For the sake of the children, let's build a new family together," he told her. I think those words saved my mother, and her lie conveniently continued through the remarriage. "Davis saved me after I lost my husband," my mother would say, turning the story into something out of a fairy tale. When Davis came to our home for the first time, my mother introduced him to us as our new dad. Lizzie greeted him with a smile, but I was scared. I stared at the shadow of my father's memory, as if it were hiding behind Davis. After only 6 months of dating, my mother remarried Davis when I was 8. The wedding was extravagant, and my mother looked happy. But I couldn't shake a deep sense of unease. Something felt wrong. And that feeling eventually became reality. "We can finally be a normal family now," my mother said joyfully. But she was completely wrong. Lizzie naturally warmed up to our stepfather, but I couldn't. Davis appeared kind on the surface, but I knew better. His kindness was only directed toward Lizzie, and his attitude toward me was noticeably different. At meals, the table was always filled with Lizzie's favorite dishes, while my preferences were completely ignored. I think he resented me for not accepting him. He quickly became entirely submissive to my mother. Around that time, my asthma worsened. During an attack, I felt as if I were drowning underwater. The air wouldn't reach my lungs and I couldn't breathe. The pain and fear were beyond description. When attacks happened at night, I had to endure them alone. From the next room, I could hear my mother and Davis discussing Lizzie's academic future. No one paid attention to my suffering. That loneliness hurt more than the pain of asthma. The local doctor had warned multiple times she should undergo a detailed examination at a larger hospital. But my mother and Davis always deflected, postponing it each time. Lizzie's extracurricular activities are expensive. Investing in Lizzie's future comes first. I heard those words repeatedly. One day, I collapsed in the school nurse's office. A sudden asthma attack hit me during class. The school nurse tried to call an ambulance, but my mother insisted. "I'll come pick her up myself," and refused the offer. As a result, I was left lying in the nurse's office for an hour, waiting for my mother to arrive. The nurse called my mother multiple times, urging her to let them call an ambulance, but my mother stubbornly refused. Meanwhile, my sister Lizzie had started working as a model. At her prestigious private school, she consistently ranked among the top students. For Lizzie, no expense was too great. That was the mindset my mother and stepfather shared. Even when my asthma attacks worsened, my mother hesitated to take me to a large hospital for a proper examination. Going to the hospital takes time and money, you know. Because of that reasoning, I endured many attacks without proper care. In Lizzie's room, there was a brand new computer and shelves filled with expensive learning materials for her extracurricular activities. In contrast, my room had old textbooks and hand-me-down clothes that were worn and faded. The gap between us grew larger with each passing year. More painful than the suffocating pain of asthma was the weight of my family's indifference. When I was in 9th grade, everything changed dramatically. That morning, I didn't feel well. I had a premonition that I might have an asthma attack. But my mother left to accompany Lizzie to her mock exams, and my stepfather went to work. I was left home alone. The night before, I had told my mother, "I don't feel good," but she brushed it off. "You'll be fine. It's probably just in your head." Lizzie's exams were more important to her. By early afternoon, my fears were confirmed. A sudden asthma attack hit me. I tried taking my usual medication, but it had little effect, and my breathing worsened rapidly. I called my mother, but her phone was turned off. If this keeps up, I might die. Panic began to take over. Desperate, I dialed my biological father's number, a number I wasn't supposed to call. I had secretly written it down after seeing it on my mother's call history. I often looked at the number, wondering if I should call him. But I was always too afraid of my mother's anger. This time, however, was different. Feeling like my life was at risk, I pressed the number with trembling fingers. "Hello. Dad. Help me. Myra? Is that you? What's wrong?" Through strained breaths, I explained the situation. The moment I heard my father's voice, a wave of nostalgic memories came rushing back. The view from his shoulders when he gave me piggyback rides, the breeze on the swings when he pushed me at the park, the warmth of his hand on the day we said goodbye. My father took immediate action. "I'm calling an ambulance right now. I'll meet you at the hospital." The moment I heard his reassurance, tears poured down my face. Everything I had been holding in collapsed all at once. The ambulance arrived in less than 10 minutes. As I heard the paramedics rushing in, my consciousness began to fade. When I woke up, I was already lying in a hospital bed. My father was there, waiting for me. Myra. Thank goodness. If we had been any later. He held my hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. My father looked thinner than I remembered. His hair had more gray streaks, but his gentle gaze hadn't changed. He stayed by my side in the hospital until my condition stabilized. And from that moment, everything began to come to light. After the divorce, my father had been paying child support regularly. A significant amount meant for both Lizzie and me. However, none of that money was used for my medical treatment. It had all been spent on Lizzie. My mother and stepfather had even purchased a vacation home using the child support money. A vacation home meant to be part of Lizzie's future. On weekends, they would take Lizzie there and throw lavish parties. They told me they were going out for Lizzie's modeling work, never once mentioning the existence of the vacation home. Meanwhile, the money needed for my life-saving treatments was withheld, and my necessary hospital visits were restricted. My father was furious. This is outright fraud, and above all, it's child endangerment and abuse. He reported the matter to the police. My mother and stepfather were summoned for questioning under suspicion of fraud and medical neglect. During the investigation, my mother confessed to everything. But instead of showing remorse, her attitude was defiant. Lizzie has talent. Nurturing that talent requires money. Myra. Myra is just an ordinary child. The investigation progressed quickly. The police uncovered detailed records of how the child support money had been spent. The $2,000 my father had been sending every month. Most of it had been used exclusively for Lizzie. A vacation home in California. Expensive private tutoring fees. Overseas training programs. Even cosmetic surgery expenses for Lizzie's modeling career. Meanwhile, only the bare minimum of my medical expenses, covered by basic insurance, had been paid. Doctors at the hospital informed us, if she had received proper treatment earlier, her condition wouldn't have deteriorated this much. By then, my health had already suffered irreversible damage. I was hospitalized for an extended period. This cannot be allowed to go unpunished, my father said, his anger growing by the day. He consulted a lawyer and began preparing to file charges against my mother and stepfather. Eventually, they were arrested. The charges: fraud and child abuse. Even as she was being arrested, my mother shouted, "I did nothing wrong. It was necessary to nurture Lizzie's talent." Hearing her cries, I felt overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. Yes, my mother had abused me and stolen the money meant for my well-being. But she was still my mother. I couldn't bear to watch her being taken away in the police car, and I turned my head away. After she was gone, I entered her room alone. In a drawer, hidden in the back, I found a single photograph of me as a child. In the picture, my mother was holding me, smiling warmly. When did she stop seeing me and start focusing only on Lizzie? The case quickly drew the attention of the media. Child support fraud and medical neglect. Discriminatory treatment between sisters. The headline that shocked everyone was 8 years of faking a father's death. The revelation that my father was alive created a massive ripple effect in my mother's social circle. The PTO members at Lizzie's school were furious at her betrayal. Since Lizzie had attended the same prestigious private school from elementary to high school, most of the parents had known each other for years. For years, my mother pretended to be grieving the loss of her husband, when in fact, it was all a lie. Many people felt betrayed upon discovering the truth. So those tears were fake too. We felt so sorry for her, and even invited her out for meals. She trampled on our kindness. The lies my mother built snowballed into something massive. Reactions from the neighbors varied. I always thought she walked around like she was better than everyone else. But the children, how sad for them. Can you believe her husband was alive this whole time? Rumors spread rapidly, and more curious onlookers began gathering in front of our house, As the trial progressed, my mother's web of lies unraveled piece by piece. Even my stepfather believed that my father had passed away. The elaborate facade my mother had constructed was slowly stripped away, layer by layer. But beneath it all, the trial revealed something darker: my mother's own inner demons. A psychiatric evaluation during the trial revealed that she suffered from a severe approval-seeking disorder. She had an extreme fear of how others perceived her, and she compulsively lied to maintain an ideal image. This pathological tendency was likely at the root of all the distortions in our family. Still, I can't help but wonder sometimes. What if my mother had admitted to the divorce from the beginning? What if she had been able to live honestly, without being consumed by appearances and the judgment of others? Would our family story have turned out differently? Amid all this, Lizzie came to visit me in the hospital. "Myra." "I'm so sorry," Lizzie said, tears streaming down her face. She was a victim too. Under the heavy burden of my mother and stepfather's expectations, she hadn't been allowed to have her own will. She had lived entirely under their control. For the first time, I understood her pain. Lizzie opened up to me. She told me that modeling, the cosmetic surgery, none of it was her choice. "The truth is, I never wanted to be a model," she said, her voice trembling. "My mom kept telling me, 'You're special,' but being special just became a weight on my shoulders. Because I was special, I wasn't allowed to have normal friends. Because I was special, I couldn't wear the clothes I liked. Everything was decided by her standards." Since middle school, Lizzie had been struggling with anorexia. She had been forced into extreme diets for magazine shoots. My mother hadn't noticed Lizzie's suffering. Or maybe she had chosen not to see it. "The truth is, I wanted to be a chef," Lizzie said with a shy smile. "But Mom always said, a model being a chef is ridiculous, so the only time I really had fun was during cooking classes at school." Lizzie took out her phone and showed me the screen. It was filled with photos of dishes she had made, secretly captured pictures, like treasures she had hidden away for herself. "Myra, we didn't know anything about each other, did we? I was forced to carry the burden of being special and you were ignored by our mother. But from now on it'll be different, right?" I nodded firmly. We hadn't built a real relationship as sisters before, but things would be different now. Lizzie had just wanted to live a normal life as a regular high school girl. "Lizzie, I'm sorry too. I didn't notice what you were going through." We embraced each other and cried. The years we spent misunderstanding each other, the days we kept missing each other emotionally, healing, all of that would take time. But one thing was certain: this was the beginning of something new for us. My father gained custody of both me and Lizzie. He adjusted his work schedule and prepared a new home for us. It was a small house, but it was filled with warmth. Lizzie quit her entertainment career and chose to focus on her studies as a regular high school student. With proper medical care, my asthma slowly began to improve. My mother and stepfather received prison sentences following the trial. On the day of the sentencing, my mother continued to justify her actions until the very end. Watching her, I felt a deep sadness. She had lost sight of what true happiness meant. Now, our family has begun a new chapter. My father surrounds us with the same warmth he always did. On weekends, the three of us have a tradition of cooking together. Lizzie takes charge of planning the menu, while my father and I help as her assistants. Sometimes things don't go as planned, but those moments are part of the memories we cherish. On my father's desk at work, there is a photo of Lizzie and me. It's not one of her glamorous photos from her modeling days, but a simple picture of us. My father loves us for who we are, just as we are. Lizzie has started studying to enroll in a culinary school. "When I grow up, I want to open my own cafe," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It had a natural glow that I never saw during her modeling days. Thanks to regular hospital visits and proper treatment, my asthma has stabilized significantly. Free from the constant fear of attacks, I've begun thinking about my dreams. I want to use my love for drawing, something I've cherished since childhood, to bring warmth to others. That dream is slowly beginning to take shape.